Today, from the Contemporary English Version with Study Helps, I'm going to read to you John chapter 6, verses 8 to 15, which reads, Andrew, the brother of Simon Peter, was one of the disciples. He spoke up and said, There is a boy here who has 5 small loaves of barley bread and 2 fish. But what good is that with all these people? The ground was covered with grass, and Jesus told his disciples to get everyone to sit down. About 5,000 men were in the crowd. Jesus took the bread in his hands and gave thanks to God. Then he passed the bread to the people, and he did the same with the fish, until everyone had plenty to eat. The people ate all they wanted, and Jesus told his disciples to gather up the leftovers, so that nothing would be wasted. The disciples gathered them up and filled 12 large baskets with what was left over from the 5 barley loaves. After the people had seen Jesus work this miracle, they began saying, This must be the prophet who is to come into the world. Jesus realized that they would try to force him to be their king, so he went up a mountain where he could be alone. Just think about it. Jesus being the king of a kingdom would be wonderful. Jesus would achieve so much and do so much good for the people. But when Jesus realized these people were going to make him king, figuratively, he went away to be alone. Why? God had called him to do something else. There are many things that Jesus could have done, but Jesus stuck with what God called him to do. Jesus, being God, could have been everywhere at once and preached to every human being at the same time. But Jesus remained where God had placed him. Jesus focused on walking at God's pace and doing what God called him to do where he called him to do it. There are times I've pressured myself unnecessarily as though I could preach to the world at once. I would try to do everything. It's important that we know and understand what God is calling us to do in each season, circumstance, and moment in our lives. We can find that out through prayer, asking for understanding, direction, and insight. You can literally go on your knees and say, God, what are you calling me to do in this season? What am I to focus on? What am I supposed to put first in this season? What am I supposed to put first in this season? Jesus focused on what God called him to do and where he called him to do it. The same goes for Paul. Paul went to the cities God called him to go to. He didn't go to cities he thought was good and he thought would be better. He went where God called him to go. And we ought to do the same. Because trust me, to you may have so many ideas about how to preach the gospel, how to do this and how to do that. And even if those come from good intentions, God's plan and his will is perfect. So we ought to trust his plan and will and not our own. Have a blessed day in Jesus' name. Amen.